Hi, everyone. I think we'll get started. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you also to our speakers. I'm really, really excited for this talk. Thank you to the Brooks McCormick Jr. Animal Law and Policy Program, the Labor and Employment Action Project, and the Animal Law Society for putting on this event. This is the first in a series of events throughout Animal Law Week, so we will have different events throughout the week. We'd love to see you there. There will be an opportunity to ask questions at the end of this talk. We are recording it on Zoom, and we will be monitoring for Zoom questions as well. So I'm going to introduce our speakers, and then we'll get started. And if you're just walking in, feel free to grab food and sit down. So thank you so much for being here. Magaly Licolli grew up in Guanajuato, Mexico. Since 2015, she has helped lead the poultry campaign in Arkansas, which has gained notoriety nationwide. In 2019, Magaly became the executive director of Venceremos, a human rights worker-based organization that she co-founded, which works to ensure the dignity of poultry workers. She currently serves as a member of the Labor Research and Action Network Advisory Committee, as a board of directors of Labor Notes, and as a member of the Advisory Committee of Civil Eats. Magaly has been featured in media outlets such as The Problem with Jon Stewart, Democracy Now!, The Guardian, The New York Times, and Vox Media, to name a few. In 2020, Magaly was recognized by the Arkansas Business Publishing Group as one of Arkansas's 250 most influential leaders. Thank you so much for being here today. Amanda has been a champion and visionary for protecting and empowering food system whistleblowers for over a decade. Amanda is a Brooks McCormick Jr. Visiting Fellow at the Animal Law and Policy Program right now. Amanda's clients have included USDA food safety inspectors in ultra-high-speed slaughterhouses, contract poultry farmers faced with exploitative contracts and company retaliation, and animal researchers privy to taxpayer-funded waste and cruelty. In addition to litigating whistleblowers' cases, Amanda and her team work to draw public attention to these whistleblower stories and to turn their revelations into food system and legal reforms. Amanda's clients come from varied economic sectors and backgrounds, from factory workers to CEOs. Through assisting her clients, she has learned firsthand the importance of bringing diverse voices together to create meaningful change. Thank you both so much for being here, and without further ado, I will hand it over.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. It's my pleasure to be moderating here with you. I feel like it's an opportunity to hang out with an old friend and let some people come in and listen and ask questions about what it is we're up to, fighting on the front lines and in the trenches for workers and animal agriculture. Thank you so much for being here with my Harvard family to celebrate this Animal Law Week and kick us off with your insights and thoughts on how we can better support you and be more supportive of workers in our own efforts to advance animal law. So thank you again for joining us. In an effort to keep it more conversational, we had a chance to sort of talk before this, and one of the things I wanted to do is help frame out the context in which you work. What it looks like in the state that you're in, emotionally and geographically, and what obstacles you're facing, especially the corporate obstacles and the power imbalance that you face. So if you could you tell us, start us off a little bit about how it is that you ended up in Arkansas and ended up doing this work?
Yes. Well, thank you so much for inviting me. It's a pleasure for me to be here to share the stories of workers and why our work is so important. And yes, I began organizing poultry workers in 2014 because I graduated from the University of Arkansas. My background is theater and social justice, and I was working in a community clinic a block far from one of the biggest Tyson's plants in Springdale, Arkansas. Let's remember that Springdale, Arkansas is the home of Tyson Foods. And when I began doing that job, and I like to tell this story because I also came on doing the job without knowing anything about what these workers were facing. And it's so important because I know many of you don't know what the situation is for workers. So when I began doing this work at the community clinic, helping workers or former workers on processing plants, finding resources for those workers, I began hearing the stories of why these now former workers were struggling to find resources for medical care. And through that job, I learned a lot of the stories of workers being disabled for life because they were exposed to chemical leaks at the poultry plants, workers that had amputations, workers that needed surgeries for carpal tunnel syndrome, workers that were struggling to get bathroom breaks. And to me, it was outrageous to listen these stories because it was not one story or two. It was multiple stories, and I came to realize that it was not an isolated case. It was a systemic problem. And when I did my job, but it was not enough. I felt like something else needed to be done because for me, it was unacceptable that in order for us to have a chicken sandwich, those workers were exposed to lose their health and safety and to risk their lives for us to have a chicken sandwich. Imagine, just that connection, to me, it was unacceptable. And when I began talking about, because I moved to Arkansas in 2004, but that situation was an ongoing situation before. And to me, it was shocking that nobody was talking about this. I saw the Tyson stickers everywhere on the town, all the festivals, the events in the community had the stamp of Tyson, Georgie's, Cargill, and nobody was talking about the stories of the immigrant workers. Not even the people that advocate for the immigrants wanted to recognize that those immigrants moved to Arkansas because of those jobs. Those immigrants were poultry workers. And let's think about the immigration in Arkansas happened because of this industry. This industry has been recruiting workers, incentivizing workers. For example, back then they were giving $50 per worker if they brought a family member, a friend, and many of those workers immigrated from California. Also, Tyson has a history of illegally smuggling Mexicans to work in these jobs. So it was nothing like the immigrants just found Arkansas a place to live, but it was a place to work. And nobody talked about those things. And when I began talking about these situations with people, with community leaders, it was suddenly silence. So I began to kind of connecting the dots and realizing that it was a taboo. It was not acceptable to speak about the condition of those workers because all of these people were receiving charities from these companies. So it was a way to control the community by giving the charities for the community clinic receives funding from Tyson. The nonprofits, all of them are funded by these corporations. The University of Arkansas is funded by these corporations, Walmart and Tyson. So I began to understand the power dynamics that played and why these stories were silenced and why it was so crucial to come to strategize of what we needed to do. So for me to be now listening, I had to become an active member to tackle the issue with the community. And obviously that was no welcome right at the beginning, and it still is an issue, but little by little we are putting that conversation on the table in different spaces because this corporation has been make sure that if they give funding to a nonprofit, they should not work with us, right? So also it was not only the charity control, but to begin understanding that we are in the Bible Belt, right, in the South. The South is a right-to-work state, but also Arkansas is a corporate state. And understanding that how these corporations were using religions to manipulate the people was outrageous. And so I don't know if you or many of you or some of you know that Tyson is the only meat company that has a chaplain program where they bring faith leaders from different congregations to be at the plant to kind of, the message of Tyson and the people that don't know is that we are a family, a Christian family-owned business. We believe in Christianity. We believe in family values, and that's why we have this program. But really, it's about also to control the religious faith leaders and to control the churches. So when I began organizing, with the Latino workers. And as an organizer, you always find those places where you can come and talk to the workers. So when I try to come to the churches, because I know all of these workers come to church every Sunday, and speaking with the churches to have a space to talk with the workers and to connect with the workers, is when I began to understand the power, and that these faith leaders didn't allow me to come in to speak with the workers. And it was kind of pretty much doing this radical work for justice, right? And that I was being seen as radical, as a militant, but it was just a work of justice. And so I began finding these challenges and understanding how these corporations were moving, and understanding that they have so much power, not only in Arkansas, but now in the state or in the country. It was precisely because they began building that power in those spaces where they can control the narratives, where they can keep the people silent, and nobody wants to talk about those things. So I, at a point, I even had a faith leader coming to me and tell me, Magaly, you're too militant. You're gonna stay alone in this war because nobody's going to support you. The way that you want to organize is not the way that we organize here. And so for me, it was a decision of like, am I going to organize with the allies that want to keep the status quo of these corporations? Or am I going to really start working and doing the real work and connecting with the people? And it was a decision that I made of like, okay, if you want to leave me alone, leave me alone. I'm gonna go with the community. And I'm gonna be connecting with those people directly and being with them and knowing them personally, because when you organize workers, it's not like you're organizing the workers, you're organizing people, and you need to connect with them in a human level to understand the struggles and what it needs to be done to overcome those fears. Because yes, those people are on fear because that's the only option they have on these jobs. Like in Arkansas, if people, whenever we release a report about the bathroom breaks, that these companies were not allowing workers to take a bathroom break, and hearing the stories of workers urinating themselves on the line because they were not granted a bathroom break, it was the time that we released that report, and really understanding where we were, right, and the needs of the community, and what it needed to be done in order to bring those stories alive so people can connect with them directly, because we're not talking about only the chicken sandwich, right? We're talking about families that immigrated to Arkansas because of those jobs. So a lot of people were saying like, well, why they don't find another job, right? Who keeps them there? Like, we are in America, everybody has the right to decide where to work, but it comes from people that don't understand those dynamics, right? When you come as an immigrant, not knowing your rights, not knowing the language, they can put fear on you, because if they can tell you, like for workers, for example, if they have this system of points, if they miss a day of work because they had to go to the doctor, they will get a point. If they've had to go to the school needs, they get a point. If they reach up to 14 points, those workers are gonna be fired. So it's nothing like the workers are going to find another job in Arkansas, right? That is suitable for them. So that's how they keep these workers on fear, on violating those rights. And I think it's very important to understand that we are talking about people, right? Beyond being the workers, we're talking about people, and they're compromising their lives and their well-being in order for them to bring this food to our table.
So at the top of our conversation, you'd mentioned the injuries that you saw at the clinic. I was curious if you could tell us a little bit more about what you've heard and what you've witnessed working with the workers in Arkansas. And also in that conversation, if you could talk a little bit about when we first met each other in 2020, which was during the pandemic, maybe a little pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, post-pandemic, what were you seeing there? As far, again, not just injuries, but general treatment of workers.
Yes, as I was saying, through that job, I began hearing the stories of workers. I remember the story of this woman. She was around 40 years old. She's a single mom, and she was struggling to get the right medical treatment because she needed like over $600 on medicine every month. And she was not able to find a job because she was exposed to this chemical leak that given holes in her lungs. So she needed like the right medicine for her treatment. And so yeah, hearing the stories of workers being exposed to those accidents, and then and what happened, right? Like you got this accident, and what the company did, nothing. They got fired because the company didn't want to take responsibility. And also okay, so why don't you go to see a lawyer, to the doctor, right? And understanding that really there is not many lawyers that will take those cases because they don't want to go against these companies. And doctors that was misleading the right situation of workers because they were working for the company. So it was all of these situations that enabled workers to find the right treatment. And a lot of those workers were exposed to those chemical leaks, workers who got an amputation, workers who got surgeries for the carpal tunnel syndrome because the repetitive motion that back then they had to process. The line speed was running to 130 beats per minute and then got increased to 145 beats per minute. So that repetitive motion, the deboning department where workers have to cut the wings, the legs of runs to 30 beats per minute, so they have to cut on that time. And so obviously they're acting like machines. That's why their bathroom breaks are restricted, because they don't have enough people to replace them when they go to the bathroom, and they have to wait 30 minutes and hours, for them to get a bathroom break. So whenever the pandemic hit, I was organizing workers in 2019 because of the high chemicals at the plant. The workers were not able to breathe and to do that job without crying out on the line, and they were not able to breathe properly. So we were trying to organize, I was trying to organize the workers about the excessive use of chemicals, the paracetic acid, and all the long effects that have on their health. But then we got the pandemic, and it was like a huge alert. The workers were so worried because their lungs were already vulnerable, and we knew very little about the virus. We only knew that the people were dying, and that the lungs were being affected. So they were already vulnerable, right? So when the pandemic happened, we didn't even have a space. We didn't have an office. I was meeting with workers in a church that a faith leaders allowed us to be there. It was one of the two faith leaders that always stood with us, with the workers. And so then suddenly we could not meet in person, but I could not leave the workers in the worst time of the history of our times. And so I began organizing workers through calls every week. I was organizing workers from 5 different plants. And yes, the situation became worse whenever they began getting sick. And I remember the story of Plácido. Plácido was one of those workers that were exposed to a chemical leak in 2011. He was struggling with his respiratory problems. And now with the pandemic, he was struggling before, and he was on a short-term disability The company called him immediately, we need you here, we need you here, you need to come back to work, because they were struggling with all of this, the pandemic and all of that, because Tyson suddenly, and the government actually called these workers essentials. They were heroes. Tyson called the workers, you're a hero, you're essential, we need you to come. So it was like that. So Placido had to come back to work, and soon after he died because he contracted COVID and he could not survive it. So the situation began getting worse because we saw now workers dying on their jobs, and how the government was acting together with these companies to really, in April of 2020, the government under the Trump administration allowed the line speed to increase from 145 birds per minute to 172 birds per minute. Tyson was, everybody was talking about the essential workers, but later we found out that actually Tyson was exporting meat to China, over like 30 tons of meat in China on the month of April of 2020. So they were not working because we didn't have meat, we had a shortage of meat, and how Tyson put themselves like they had to force the workers to keep working because nobody's going to eat. It was not because of that. It was because of the profits. It was about putting their lives on risk for profits. And it was the year that Tyson took all these companies really took a big advantage of the situation to gain more profits.
Absolutely. I remember your call. We had a few calls, and there was one time where we got on the phone, and it was a conference call, and there were some workers talking to me. I remember it vividly. One of the workers said, the difference between the workers and the chickens is that the chickens have value dead, and we don't as workers. And it just stuck with me, the importance of what you were doing, and what in the middle of this pandemic, while people were literally being forced into work, not knowing what this disease was, knowing that they were already very, very sick, and now had to endure something that was completely unknown to them, and that the audacity of our government to refer to them as essential when they were so easily disposable and remain disposable. I'd like you to talk a little bit more, if you could, about that transition, that change in 2020, where the profitability skyrocketed. And you're absolutely correct, having done this work across different sectors, the pork industry was outsourcing and selling record numbers of exports during the time when they said they were desperately trying to put meat on Americans' tables. So could you talk a little bit about that high profitability and what you saw after the pandemic to try to keep those profits up?
Yes, well, definitely in 2020, a lot of workers died, and they died because they literally every day they came to work not knowing how many cases or how many people were infected. Tyson kept that in secret. So workers began dying. And actually, before we jump into that, I like to say that, yes, when you ask the workers what do they want, they always say, I want to be treated more than the chicken that I produce, because for Tyson and these companies, the chicken is more important than our lives. So in 2020, when workers were dying, I have this story of this worker that her co-worker died of COVID, and soon after George Floyd was killed, and Tyson forced the workers to pay 1 minute of silence for George Floyd, and the workers were looking at each other and saying, what about us? Who cares about us? Who cares about our my co-workers? So now it's not about going against paying this minute of silence to somebody else, but it was like, and where are we on all of this? And that the company never recognized the numbers of how many workers were dying. They keep that everything, the records were not really the truth records, right? So then in 2020, workers were getting sick and the production never stopped, right? The workers that stayed on the jobs had to keep up with the quota. And then in 2021, many workers died. A lot of workers also, we have a lot of cases of workers that got long COVID and were not able to return to their jobs. And then we saw the desperation of this company, right? They trying to bring more workers or trying to incentivize new workers, and then actually increase the payment to $15 an hour for new workers. But the workers who were there for 20 years, more than 20 years, were still making $13 an hour. So the workers began getting angry because it was like, how is these new people are gonna be paid more? And so we had to organize and do protests about that. And the situation became worse and worse because the company tried to replace the workers and bring in more workers. And so let's think about, like, when you put your bar too high in 2020, they made a lot of profits. It was hard. In 2020 we saw increase of the meat, right? The meat increased because they were trying to, where are we gonna put the profits up more than the 2020? And that has been really the answer of trying to bring refugees. Well, the refugees have been coming since 2018 or so, but now we have the child labor laws, right, in Arkansas. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I'd love for you to talk about that a little bit more. I think many of us are aware of some of the recent news with slaughterhouses employing young children to work in them. But in the course of our conversations, I learned that you also had some unique encounters with children as laborers for Tyson in the catch crews. If you could very briefly describe what a catch crew is, and then let us know a little bit more about their stories.
Yes, those workers, they call the catchers, no, los cachadores, is the ones that work on the chicken farms. And really, there is not a lot of work done into what's happened in those farms, right? Because often the companies, they wash off their hands because they pay the contractor, so that the contractor is in charge now to create these groups to work and upload the chickens to the cages and to be transported to the chicken plants. And so those workers, in some years, like it was 2020, at the end of 2022, a group of workers came to Venceremos. There were 6 workers, 2 of them were minors, and they came because the contractor didn't want to pay them the last check, because in that shift they were forced to work 16 hours straight without a break. And during that shift also, because they were forced to load, they usually is about 30,000 to 40,000 chickens that they have to load per shift, per a group of 6 people. And during that shift, they increased the amount. It was close to 60,000, and that's why they had to keep working more hours. And it was at the point the Little League workers could not. Like, they were tired. They actually, when they came, the kids were sleeping while the others were talking to me. And basically, the contractor got mad because they stopped working, and the contractor told him, okay, you can leave, but I'm not gonna pay you. So that's why they came to Venceremos, and I had to help them to recover 7,000 on wages. And so that's how I began to understand, like, I began asking them, like, how many kids are working on the chicken farms, and they began telling me that they have seen more and more coming in the last 2 years. Kids coming from Guatemala without their parents, and they are being brought by people from Georgia, Alabama, Arkansas. It's pretty much like a human trafficking. But since there is no investigations, right, it's pretty much what I've been trying to connect the dots. What is the situation begins? And so they told me that there is an increase of kids working, catching the birds at those chicken farms. And we also have the Department of Labor doing an investigation inside the chicken plants, where they found kids cleaning in the cleaning facilities, cleaning on those jobs. So we're not talking about kids working, serving drinks in a coffee shop, right? Or in McDonald's, or serving ice cream. We're talking about those kids doing dangerous jobs, putting their health and lives at risk every day while doing the job of bringing food to us.
So if you could, I have the benefit of knowing a little bit about what catch crews do. It's important, I think, for you to visualize that this is a huge facility with 30 to 40,000 5 to 6 pound chickens in it wall to wall, and these young men are 15, 14, 13 years old, and they're actually grabbing these chickens with their hands, by their hands. So some poultry companies do use different types of machines, but these young men are doing it by hand, physically encountering the animals. And it's also important to understand that this type of activity happens at night because the animals are sleepy then and are less likely to panic and have heart attacks, really, because they're very large animals and too large for their bodies, actually. So they do it at night while they're sleepy. So could you just describe a little bit about what kinds of injuries or things that can happen to a young person deprived of sleep and overworked?
Yeah, well, also they are exposed to high chemicals because they use a lot of ammonia on those chicken farms. And also, they have to upload these 30,000, 40,000 birds per shift, so their hands get pretty bad, swollen. They, at a point, they cannot close their hands, and they need, obviously, type of treatment. And these people are exposed to that. Sometimes, like in the summer, which is pretty hot, they actually, sometimes they are not being granted water breaks, and so they get dehydration, yes, I'm sorry. And those things are every day, they're exposed, and the companies often, as I said, they don't take responsibility because they are not hiring directly, right? But the point now is to make is like, yes, these companies are responsible because those kids or those people are working within their supply chain.
I guess I have to ask the question that a lot of people are probably thinking, that is kind of maybe comical to people like us who've been hanging around in this world for a bit. But where's the state in all of this? What kind of policies are they? Where's OSHA? Who's helping these children? Who's helping these workers?
Yeah, well, OSHA went to sleep in 2020. We haven't done anything really to protect the workers. We actually, in 2020, we were shocked that they didn't do any, they didn't set up any standards on COVID or pandemic, because we know that this might happen again, and there's still no standards about that. And the USDA with OSHA, about the line speed, this is an issue that has been ongoing for decades. And we've been trying to ask OSHA to put strong standards about the line speed so that it's regulated. But OSHA says that it's not the problem, it's the problem of the USDA. The USDA says that's not my problem, that should be OSHA. So they don't want to really take responsibility, accountability. And right now, even if there is like a regulation of amounts of birds per minute, the fact is that since the Trump administration, we have seen a decrease of inspectors of the USDA. So a lot of the times these companies violate even that line speed, because if the machinery gets broken and they wasted 2 hours fixing that machine, then when it's back on working, they need to keep up with the production and increase the line speed to make up those 2 hours that they lost. So really, the government hasn't done really much on really setting like protections or laws. This industry, on the other hand, has gained a lot of political power, and they have a lot of lobbying going on in the state level, on the federal level, and they pretty much getting away from what they want, right? With the Chicken Council too, that they are in charge of do a lot of lobbying for these companies. So there is a lot of things that need to be happening, because the thing is getting out of control, right? Now they're telling us that they are doing automation to prevent those injuries, to protect more of the workers. But if the workers will tell you right now how the situation is to process the food and the conditions and the dirt and all that happens, you wouldn't want a machine to produce your chicken, really. Because if right now the workers are in charge to make sure, even if the workers, for example, one of the workers just last week was telling me that they were forcing to cook the chicken in a certain period of time, but the chicken was not being cooked. And she had to stop because she saw that a lot of pieces were going without being cooked. And now she got a point. Why did you stop the line? But she's like, well, I'm seeing this is not being cooked properly, and they are not taking care of that situation of the food safety. So imagine, even for us, this is a situation that I always tell, it's not a problem. This is not a problem only for the workers that need to be solved, right? This is the problem that we all have to take responsibility, because we need to grow that consciousness of where is the food coming from? What is my responsibility as a consumer to demand that these companies have more regulations for the workers, for the sustainability of the workforce, for the animals, for the environment. So it's not only the work of the workers or the organizers or people that are against it. It's about everybody coming together and raise that consciousness to demand better policies in place.
So I can just sort of add a little bit up onto that inspector part, since a lot of my legal representation has been federal meat inspectors, and one of the things that people don't understand is that the meat inspector is not there to protect the workers. That isn't why they're there, and also the worker isn't there to protect your food. And a lot of people misunderstand that and the roles that are being played out day by day in these slaughter plants. What you're talking about, a worker stopping the line, that is unheard of. A federal meat inspector protecting the safety of chicken might lose their job stopping the line, but for a worker to do that is an extraordinary risk on their behalf, and they are loyal to the company.
Yeah, they made her sign written like a warning, right? If she does that again, she will be fired. So now, if she sees that happening, she's not gonna stop it, right?
So I think there's again, it's trying to help people understand who's who in this workplace, and how they keep everybody very siloed and their jobs are very separate. And it's why the raising of consciousness is absolutely critical for if we're going to make these changes. We have to see that it's all very connected, and that there's no one individual or one issue area here. There's a systemic problem. I did want to just touch a little bit more on automation. I know that there's a new Tyson plant in Virginia that is heavily relying on automation and has a reduced workforce as an option, right? So robots doing these hard works, or machines doing the hard work. Doesn't that help workers in your opinion?
Well, no, actually, when the Virginia plant shut down last year, at the same time the Van Buren plant in Arkansas shut down, the workers came to Venceremos because the plant announced to the workers 2 months before that the plant was going to be closed. In Van Buren is like an hour south where we are, is even smaller than Springdale, and a lot of the immigrants immigrated to Van Buren because of Tyson. So many workers were working at Tyson for 10, 20, 30 years. And when Tyson told them, okay, we're gonna shut down the plant, bye, it was so like close to 1,000 workers working on that plant. So also, they were also given like only $1,000, big thank you for your years of service. And the workers were in shock because they didn't understand that didn't have laws, stronger laws to protect them. You know, a lot of those workers were are Mexicans, and in Mexico we have a law that no matter what the company is, it's a federal law. They have to pay you for the length of service if the company is laying off workers or even if they quit. They have to pay you for that length of service. And for the workers, were shocking to learn that after 20 years, 25 years, they were only given $1,000. And they came and said, you know, Magaly, the plant is closing, we are injured, the working conditions are bad, they are giving us only 1,000. And I had to explain them, you know, that that law didn't apply in the US, that we don't have those laws, those protections in the US, and not even in Arkansas because we are in a right to work state. And the company was not taking really responsibility of the amount of workers that were injured, because workers, whenever they're injured with carpal tunnel syndrome, often won't say it because the company won't pay them workers' comp, and because if they get a surgery, probably they will lose that job. So often they remain silent because they don't want to lose the job, because they don't want to fight the company, because they have to fight the company in order for them to get workers' comp. So the workers were injured for many years. They needed surgeries, and the company was shutting down. And it was the moment that we said we need to stick together and demand those changes. And non-unionized workers went on a strike for a full week. And we were on the picket line for 12 hours each day. It was insane. It was over 400 workers, around 400 workers that went on a strike. And it was because of that, you know, it was like those people needed those jobs, right? And it was an income for those workers. So after that, the plant shut down. A lot of workers don't have jobs. They're struggling for food. And some workers were able to find other jobs near other cities, but they had to compromise a lot, right? For the companies just coming to say we're shutting down, and it was not because of just because the production was taken to another plant, forcing the other workers to produce more now, while they are trying to bring this automatization to not really protect workers, but to really make more profits and investing less in the workforce. So that is the situation that we are right now. And I think we need to act together to put more standard regulation in the government, because this is getting out of control, or is out of control.
You are an absolute force of nature. I have to say this only because I'm super aware that we're in a law school. Were there any? I know you did a lot of this on your own. I know you did. But what kind of supports did you find along the way? And I'm definitely hinting. Did you find any nice lawyers to help you out along the way?
Yes. Yes.
That's it. That's all. There's like two. And
No. No, yes, I think our great support comes from outside Arkansas, really. We always have these allies that come forward to support us. The National Advocacy Network, it's amazing. They have been helping us in cases on LRB, you know, and helping us strategize legally with the workers. So that's been amazing to have.
And since we're here at Animal Law Week, what do you see? What is it that people interested in animal law can do to support worker advocates and Venceremos?
Yes, stay connected to our work. I think for us, it's very important to get a lot of support from the schools, to have these spaces to bring the attention to what is happening, and connecting with Venceremos is very important to really know what we are up to. So yeah, I encourage you to keep in touch with us, to bring that solidarity, because we need you all.
Well, wonderful. I see that we have some questions from Zoom, and I guess there's maybe some folks. If you have questions, now is the time. We have a microphone for those in person. Did you want to go ahead and start with Zoom? Oh, no, you got someone? Okay.
It's really simple. Can I just ask, do you have,
use the mic just so we can hear you.
do you, first of all, thank you for everything you do. And in the spirit of what can we do for you, do you have a lawyer on your team who could supervise law students if they were to be able to volunteer for you in the summer or throughout the year? And this is a longer conversation we can have, but I would imagine there's students who would love to get involved, and there might be some requirements about having a supervisor, but I just wanted to put that out there for everyone in the room and for you, that we might be able to offer you consistent support, and it's a longer conversation, but thank you for everything you're doing.
Thank you. We need that support, definitely.
Hi, Magali. Sorry. Thank you for everything that you do. Like, you are really like a legend, an inspiration. And I want to, only if you want to share with us, because I'm really curious about your own story, your own path, coming from Guanajuato and coming to the US and do all this work for all these people. If you can share us, like, how was your life before in Mexico, and what made you immigrate to this country?
Yes. Well, I didn't really have a, well, I was an actress in Mexico doing theater, and I am an artist. So I immigrated to Arkansas for personal reasons. I got married and so with someone that lived in Arkansas. But my story, I mean, my whole family lives in Mexico. I'm by myself in Arkansas because my family enjoys Mexico. They don't like to come here, and I don't blame them. But to me, this job has changed tremendously my life. You know, I think when I became aware of the stories, I became responsible for, like, to do something that nobody has done, and to have the courage to take that job and to, I mean, because obviously you sacrifice your own wealth, you know, your own well-being, like you are a target, right? So you need to change a lot of things in your personal life too. And yeah, it's definitely a lot of personal sacrifice, but it's not like I suffer either. I love it. I really love it.
Thank you very much. So I don't know the history of chicken very well, but I know that in like the 1950s and 60s, one of the major ways of regulating line speeds was unions and union contracts. And I just wanted to hear like how you understand like Venceremos alongside like traditional unions, and whether you see hope for new waves of union organizing in these industries, or if not, what might have to change.
Well, it is pretty hard in the context where we are, right? I think, yes, there is a lot of need to the unions to do more work on bringing more unionization in other plants. We, as Venceremos, we had an amazing experience of visiting Magaly, Florida in 2018, and learned about the Fair Food Program and the worker-driven social responsibility model. And since then, the workers were like, why don't we bring that model to the poultry? And so since the inception of Venceremos, that's been the goal of implementing a program that is a worker-driven social responsibility model.
Sorry to make you come all the way over here. Hi, thank you so much for being here. I have a question about something that you mentioned earlier related to a lot of like media attention that this issue got around COVID, because there was a lot of coverage, there was a lot of focus, and then a lot of that seemed to go away. So I'm curious to get your thoughts on like if that focus had an impact, like if you've seen changes since then, or if the matches have been sort of battened down even tighter since that point?
Well, before COVID, we were struggling to find spaces to talk about this. I think less people were interested about poultry workers or processing workers. Not a lot of people were paying attention to what was happening. So the good side of that was that the situation got exposed to a national level, to international level, even because people from Europe were contacting us too. And so yeah, that helped to expose the problem, right? So right now, obviously, the media has been all over the places, but our work is to continue growing the work to bring the attention to the people, and that's why it's so important. After COVID, we were able to have more spaces to be in universities, to travel more. You know, a lot of people are more concerned about what's happening. Also, with the animal rights people, it bring that attention to, it was not only the animals, right? In 2020, actually, the Humane League stepped in and called me, Magaly, what do you need? And oh my gosh, it was a huge help, because they understood that now they needed to look for the workers, right? And so right now it's about like this animal organization trying to also work together with worker rights groups like Venceremos, you know, to bring solutions together. So I think, yes, it did a lot of shift and change, and obviously we are continue growing the impact.
Probably have time for one more quick question.
Hey, thank you so much. Since you mentioned the coalition of Magaly workers, I was curious if you could speak to the role that consumers will need to play in doing this work. Have there been efforts that you or other groups have engaged in so far to make Tyson's consumers or other consumers of poultry aware of some of this, and where do you see opportunities for continuing that work?
Yes, I think that it's a great model, because it really works on the power dynamics, right? On buying. Like, yes, these companies, like for workers, right? In Arkansas, it's like, Magaly, Tyson has a lot of power. We feel so powerless. And so how are we gonna go and build an organization in the patio, one of the most biggest companies in the US? So whenever we do this power dynamic exercise, right, to understand that yes, these companies have a lot of power, but who's on top of these companies, right? The buyers that are connected to the consumers more directly, right? The McDonald's, Burger King, Chick-fil-A. And so how do we mobilize these consumers, the public, right, to understand and to do the connection between where the food comes from and what is your role in putting that pressure to these companies? I think is important, and is an amazing and how that model works to bring everybody together to really set rights that not even the government has been able to do for workers.
I think we're out of time. Oh, it should be on. Is it on? Can you guys hear me? Okay. We're out of time, I think, but Magaly is staying here for a few minutes. If you have any additional questions, feel free to come up. But we want to thank you from the bottom of our hearts for flying from Arkansas to be here and to present to the students. And Amanda, thank you so much. And Kelly, thank you so much. Sarah, and to everyone who attended today. This was an exciting launch to Animal Law Week, and we hope that you'll be here for the rest of the week. And thank you so much, Naomi, for organizing this panel and thinking of this speaker. And it was really all of Naomi's idea. So.